but I'm over 60 and I feel like, I've got nothing left to give. Is that true?
Last month we had 4 donors, 80 years old.
Wow.
All of the 4, we took a liver, and for 1 or 2 of them also kidneys.
Welcome, friends, to the 4th season of Heart to Heart with Michael, a program for the bereaved community. Our purpose is to empower members of our community, and this season we're looking at grief in its various forms. We'll be taking a look at the role of trauma as it affects grief. It's no secret that on this program we're also big fans of organ donation, so this month we're going to revisit the topic with an emphasis on transplant organization and management. Our guest today is Dr. Tamar Ashkenazi. Tamar Ashkenazi, RN, Ph.D., received her doctorate from Tel Aviv University. She has been the director and national coordinator of Israel's Ministry of Health's National Transplant Center for over 22 years. She established the National Organ Donor Coordination System and created the systems for organ donor care management by dedicated ICU doctors and quality control for organ procurement, as well as a unique support program for organ donor families that conducts support groups across the country. Her research includes studies of public attitudes towards organ donation and incentive policies, organ donation and organ allocation rates, and a comparative study of organ donor families' adjustments to loss. Her work has been published in journals such as Transplantation, Marketing Health Services, and The Lancet. She published her book, Mourning, The Days After Loss, that offers insights and practical advice on coping with loss and grief. Dr. Ashkenazi, thank you for coming to the program.
It's my pleasure to be with you.
Thank you very much. It's a particular honor to have you here because, as most people know, when my daughter died, we transplanted 4 organs that night. I believe we saved 4 women in Israel, as well as sending skin and cartilage and the cornea to the bank. So I'm personally invested here. So your organization is called Adi. Can you tell us who was Adi and why you named it for Adi?
Adi was my fiancé 40 years ago, more than 40 years. And he needed a kidney. He made a dialysis 3 times a week. And after he received the transplant, he told to his parents that it's very important that every person in Israel will sign an organ donor card as a way to impress his wishes. Mm-hmm. And about 4 months after the kidney transplant, he had acute rejection, mm-hmm. and he died. Parents decided to fulfill his wish and to establish the donor card, and the name is Adi card. Now everybody in Israel, I think, or most of the people in Israel, know that Adi card is a donor card.
These were the earliest days of transplanting in Israel. There was no organization before that. How did this all come about?
Israel Transplant established at 94, but there were not enough donations, and the mm-hmm. Ministry of Health decided to look for another countries or to look for another solution or ideas how to increase the numbers of donors. Mm-hmm. And the Ministry of Health established a special team or mm-hmm. committee to look for new ideas, how to improve the results, how to increase the numbers of donors each year. Mm-hmm. And they decided to adopt the Spanish model. And it means that there is a key donation person in each hospital. So the decision was to look for a nurse to be a donor coordinator in each hospital. And then that donor coordinator had to organize everything from the procedure of organ donation and to invite the committee to organize all the procedures and then to approach the family for the donation and then to take care of all the other things like the theater room and so on. And mm-hmm. since that time, we have been raising year to year the numbers of donors.
How are we doing year to year? How are we doing? Are we getting more people donating now than we have before?
Yes, I think that 22 years ago, when we established this system, we had a 42% of consent rate.
Wow.
And now it's 65, the consent rate.
I didn't realize we were doing so well. How does that against the rest of the world? Are we good?
Yeah, we are very good. And it's not only the consent rate, it's also the reason it's in each hospital, even if it's a small hospital, there is donor coordinator that can't miss even one donor a year.
Wow.
That is very important to know. At the end, of course, she stay with kind of relations with donor families.
I can say that I experienced that exactly when it looked like the end was coming. We were having our end of life discussion with the doctor, and he was telling us there were certain things that we could do. We had basically two options. One was to turn off everything and let her go with a certain dignity, and the other was to turn off everything except the breathing apparatus, and then that would crash. And my original decision had been for that, because I was able to show in front of my other children that we did everything possible, even though I knew by then that there was really no value in it. And the doctor said, well, that's okay, but if you do that, then we can't do any transplants. And suddenly a light went off in my head. I said, stop, we talked about this. I forgot. My wife wants to talk about transplants. And then all of a sudden, everything changed. The coordinator comes into the room, and the doctor suddenly has a whole different set of procedures in front of us. And it was wonderful. It was so well handled. And I think one of the most important things that you mentioned is that she maintains contact. They helped us get back to Jerusalem, where Liel was buried. She had to stop in Tel Aviv for a day where the organs were harvested. All of that was handled. All we had to do was go home and show up on time, and it was all handled perfectly for us. I guess the next question is not only the consent rate, but how's the success rate? Do we have a lot of successful organ transplants walking around in Israel today?
Yes, quite well, yeah. Never enough.
Okay.
There is a longer waiting list in Israel. The same situation in other countries. Maybe there are some countries that the waiting list is a little bit shorter. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know that in this country, if you are a donor, then if someone in your immediate family needs a transplant, they move up the line. That's one of the considerations, is there a donor in your family. Is that unique to Israel, or do other countries do that?
We were the first.
Wow.
I know that some countries are interested in to adopt this approach. I'm not sure, and I'm not up to date, whether they already started with this or not yet.
I find that fascinating, that you help yourself by helping others, and I think that's a good way to look at transplants.
Home Tonight Forever by the Baby Blue Sound Collective.
I think what I love so much about this CD is that some of the songs were inspired by the patients.
Many listeners will understand many of the different songs and what they've been inspired by. Our new album will be available on iTunes, Amazon.com, Spotify.
I love the fact that the proceeds from this CD are actually going to help those with congenital heart defects.
Enjoy the music.
Home Tonight Forever.
Hi, my name is Jamie Alcroft, and I just published my new book, The Tin Man Diaries. It's an amazing story of my sudden change of heart as I went through a heart and liver transplant. I can think of no better way to read The Tin Man Diaries than to cuddle up in your favorite Hearts Unite the Globe sweatshirt and your favorite hot beverage, of course, in your Hearts Unite the Globe mug, both of which are available at the Hug Podcast Network online store, or visit heartsunitetheglobe.org.
This content is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. The opinions expressed in the podcast are not those of Hearts Unite the Globe, but of the hosts and guests, and are intended to spark discussion about issues pertaining to congenital heart disease or bereavement. You are listening to Heart to Heart with Michael. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on Michael's program, please email him at michael@hearttoheartwithmichael.com. Now, back to our program.
Tamar, what are some of the special difficulties regarding organ donation in Israel? I'm speaking of the donor side mostly.
I think that the main barrier to organ donation is the religion.
Mm-hmm.
After the 2008, that the brain dead law passed,
Mm-hmm.
we received more support from the rabbis, from the leaders that said that now the procedure is based on the halachic criteria or halachic laws or rules, that they can now make sure or be sure that there is the procedure, how to declare brain dead. Do you remember some of this?
I absolutely do, and I'd like to talk about that. First of all, for people who don't know what halachic law is, it's Jewish religious law. And what happened was that the rabbis were having difficulty allowing or approving transplantation because they didn't understand or they didn't like the current definition of death. And so when Israel defined brain death in a way that the rabbis could go along with it in terms of Jewish religious law, that really opened things up. And so what happened to us was, before Liel was pronounced dead, she had to be first pronounced brain dead. There is no earlier definition of death now in Israel. It's brain death. And so what happened was, when all the brain activity had stopped, then they had to do a CT where they would see that there was no flow of blood in the brain, and then they could technically call brain death. And by doing it in a very simple and clear view, it made it a lot easier for the rabbis to come on and get on board with transplantation. Have I got that right?
Exactly.
I think it's important that we should also mention that Israel is 80% Jewish, but it's also about 18% Muslim and 2% Christian. And so how are the other religions on board with this?
The Muslims leaders also believe in this approach to declare brain dead. They also support this very much.
Well, it's important, I think, to note that the Sharia law, the Muslim law, is also very similar to the Jewish law on the question of death, which makes a lot of sense. I mean, everyone wants to be very, very careful how they decide that somebody's dead. Nobody wants to be accused of farming organs when they're not supposed to. So the biggest stumbling block for most religious organizations is, are you sure the person is really dead? And can you find out in a way that it's not too late to use the organs? And I think that's really where everything comes together. And so what we've done is they've included a religious understanding of death that would be acceptable to Muslims as well. And so now in the state of Israel, transplantation is much more open and much more available to everybody, and they can relax about their religious views. I just want to point out at this time that statistically, we saved 4 women in Israel that night from age 66 to 7.5. And that 7.5-year-old little girl was a Palestinian girl from East Jerusalem, literally 20 minutes from my house, who we never would have had any contact with at all, except that now she's alive because of my daughter's kidney. And without going where we don't really want to go tonight on this conversation, I will say that it's a wonderful thing to be able to pick up your head and say, in this country, everybody is treated with the same equality and the same fairness, and anybody who needs gets, and it doesn't matter where it comes from or where it goes. What counts is that people who have it give it to people who need it. And while on the one hand, I don't like to congratulate people for doing what they should do anyway, I think we can look up and say we've done something here really special.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what can people do? Can a family's wishes trump the desire of a person who's already signed a card? I've signed a card, I've passed away, you're getting ready to take organs from me because that was my wish. Can my family come up and say, no, you can't do that?
First of all, we make a conversation with each family. It doesn't matter if the donor was signed an organ donor card or not.
Mm-hmm.
We talk with every family, and they can say yes and they can say no. But 98% of the families that next of kin was signed an organ donor card, it's not that only they say yes. They want very much to fulfill his wishes. So they're so care about this. They want the transplant success and everything. It's very important for them.
That's really heartwarming, and I'm glad that's the case, because I know that just 3 weeks before our case, there was a more famous case. Again, without getting into names, there was a famous person in Israel who had signed the card and was set to donate organs. At the last minute, something happened. I don't really know the story. Something happened, and his family pulled the plug. Didn't happen, and he had signed that card.
There are few families that refused organ donation. Even their next of kin was signed an organ donor card.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes I can understand the reasons. I remember a family, the father was killed by the car accident, and his wife and his kids, all of them were signed on organ donor card, including him, the father. But then the family said, I remember, when we, all of us, the three sons and the mother, when we signed the organ donor cards at our home, he did it after we pressed him. Pressed him to do so. He didn't want. So, she said to me, I'm afraid that he will come in my dreams and will be angry with me or something like that.
I'm so sorry.
It's difficult in such situation to push her, and we try, but we could understand her, because she said that he didn't sign on her 100% of
Right. Well, that's the thing. I understand that, and but in this particular case, I'm not sure that's what happened. But that's okay. I understand that sometimes people change their minds and things happen. But you say the most percentage though is that people, once they've signed, their families are good.
Yeah.
I think it's very encouraging though that once it's signed, most families go along with it and honor the wishes of the dead, and I believe that's a.
But something else I can say.
Sure.
Even the dead person wasn't signed an organ donor card, but one of the family members carried an organ donor card. He can change the family opinion not to change. Sometimes it's just to lead the decision to say yes.
It's good to know that when you sign the card, your chances are over 90% that it will be honored. It's good to know that if there's at least one person in the family who has the card, they can help lead the discussion and make sure or try to bring people towards the idea of donating, especially at the end.
I was 5 hours old when I had my first surgery.
Wow.
The only advice I can really give someone like that is to be there for your family.
This is life, and you have two choices. You either live it or you sit in a corner and cry.
I am Anna Jaworski and the host of Heart to Heart with Anna. Join us on Tuesdays at noon Eastern Time on Spreaker or Blog Talk Radio. We'll cover topics of importance for the congenital heart defect community. Remember, my friends, you are not alone.
If you've enjoyed listening to this program, please visit our website, heartsunitetheglobe.org, and make a contribution. This program is a presentation of Hearts Unite the Globe and is part of the Hug Podcast Network. Hearts Unite the Globe is a nonprofit organization devoted to providing resources to the congenital heart defect community to educate, empower, and enrich the lives of our community members. If you would like access to free resources pertaining to the CHD community, please visit our website at congenitalheartdefects.com for information about CHD, hospitals that treat CHD survivors, summer camps for CHD families, and much, much more.
You are listening to Heart with Michael. If you have a question or comment that you would like addressed on our program, please send an email to Michael Lieben at michael@hearttoheartwithmichael.com. Now, back to Heart with Michael.
Tamar, what can you tell me about the actual process? What I'm really thinking about is the longer-term support. It doesn't end that day. What happens to the family?
We are continue with many kinds of relationship with donor families. We send them a letter that explain about the ways to contact us. The donor coordinator go to visit the family in the Shiva, in the morning days. And then I think continue with to contact the family at least at Pesach, Rosh Hashanah. And we have a support groups. Each one of the family members can join us. There is no limitation of time. I mean, not for 2 years or 1 year. They can come, and some of them do so, attend these meetings for 14 years, 20 years, 3 years. They can make a break and then to come again. There is no limitation. It's for free, of course. We also organize meetings between the donor families and the recipients. It depends of both wishes, of course. Some of the donor families joined us for public awareness. They come with us to give lectures in the universities, in schools, sometimes with medical doctors. They meet them, they tell the stories, they share with them their personal story to teach them.
That's such a good thing. I've done that. I once spoke to a group of doctors. I've spoken to high school students. It's a lot more difficult for me than I would have thought it would be because I speak publicly all the time. But it was very, very difficult. It was one of the most fulfilling moments, though, I've ever had. And I think it also helps us. It's a remembrance. It's a memorial for our lost loved ones. And I've said this before in other programs, that the way we remember our loved ones is the way other people will remember them and know them as well. And so it's an opportunity for us to go out to speak to new people is always a good thing. And to speak to doctors is a tremendous moment when you've got a room full of doctors who are listening to what you have to say. And I appreciate that you've given us that opportunity to do that. If there was one thing that you wanted to tell people who were concerned about donation or not quite ready to cross the line and sign a card, what would help make more people want to become donors? What can we tell them? What can we say?
From my experience, the most important for the donor families is the fact that they saved their lives. This is the most important for them. Mm-hmm. And it gives them a meaning for life after the loss. It helps them to feel that they did a very good things. Mm-hmm. This is the most important, that they can save life. It's really save life.
I'm over 60. I've got my card. I've signed it. And I'm glad I have it because it might help some of the younger people in my family who I hope never do, but might someday need the assistance of having a transplant. But I'm over 60 and I feel like, I've got nothing left to give. Is that true?
Last month we had 4 donors, 80 years old.
Wow.
All of the 4, we took a liver, and for 1 or 2 of them also kidneys. And I myself, I was surprised that the liver patients left the hospital between 7 to 10 days after surgery.
With 80-year-old livers and kidneys.
Yes.
That's amazing. We had a guest on this program not long ago who, because he was over 65 in California, had to get special permission. I think he was 66 or 67. It was just over the line. Had special permission, 1,001 different boards of approval. And he may be the first, as far as I know, in America, and possibly even the last so far. And you're telling me now that in Israel, you can be 80 and still donate?
Yes, but also there is no limitation to receive organs.
Oh.
It's both sides. No limitation.
That's amazing. I love this place. So why did they decide that? What is the criteria if not age?
It's a medical criteria only. And of course, the older organs to older people. But why not?
So you wouldn't put an 80-year-old kidney into a 15-year-old child, but you might put an 80-year-old kidney into somebody who's over 65. Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense because they would have a kidney roughly that age. And I am stunned and happily so. And I think it's the greatest thing I've heard. We've made news here on this program that we've never made before. This is not a news program, right? But we've just cut some breaking story. This is just amazing. And I thank you so much for that. Now, with the time that's left, let's talk about your book. Who was it written for? Where can we get it?
The name of the book is Mourning the Day After Loss. Mm-hmm. You could buy it at Amazon, I think in English now. The book offers insights and practical advice on coping with loss and grief. And there are many testimonies of the people that joined our support group. I think it's helpful for the readers to understand the people who experience loss. Mm-hmm. And it can be very, very helpful to grandparents, to friends, children, siblings, spouses, for parents, for everybody who cope with loss of a loved one. The chapters of the book are divided by time. Mm-hmm. I mean, first is a notification of death, and then the burial and all these the customs and the first day of mourning, and then the first 2 years after the loss, and then from the third year till many years later. I think everybody can find himself in the book. It doesn't matter the age of the person who read, is a family status or the cause of death. People who lost their loved ones to a car accident, cancer, suicide, stroke, heart attack. You can find yourself inside because there are so many bereaved people that I quoted here. So I can think that it's really interesting for people who grieve, also to the caregivers.
Quite frankly, I think it's the sort of book that everyone should have anyway, because eventually they're going to need it. And it's not a book that's aimed specifically at therapists. It's not a book exclusively aimed at professionals, although they can use it as a guide. But it is also a personal guide that you can read yourself when you are in a situation where you need it. It's complete with other people's experiences, many of whom may be similar to yours. And now we recognize here that everybody's grief is personal. We recognize here that everybody's grief is its own, but we also know that it's good to find common lines with other people and to draw hope or inspiration from other people's experiences.
Doesn't matter if you live here or there and all over the world. I think loss is loss, and it's the thoughts and the feelings are really universal.
Thank you for that, and thank you for the book, and thank you for that information. I have to tell you that I was completely wowed. I feel now smarter now than I did a half hour ago, and I really mean that, because I had no idea that there are, at least in this country, no limitations on age, not for giving and not for receiving. And I think that's amazing, and I think it takes into account that the world is changing and people are living longer, healthier lives, and we can still help them. So thank you so much for coming on the program today, Dr. Tamar Ashkenazi. I had a wonderful time. Thank you so much.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
That concludes this episode of Heart to Heart with Michael. I want to thank Tamar Ashkenazi for sharing her experiences regarding organ donation. Please join us at the beginning of the month for a brand new podcast. I'll talk with you soon, but please, until then, remember, moving forward is not moving away. Thank you.
Thank you again for joining us. We hope you have gained strength from listening to our program. Heart to Heart with Michael can be heard every Thursday at noon Eastern Time. We'll talk again next time when we'll share more stories.